Welcome back to the Chad Hasty Show on News Talk 95.1 FM and 790 AM KFYO. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Joining us on the phones, Republican strategist and a good friend of the show, Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning. How are you today?
Pretty good, Chad. Good morning.
I guess we could start off, not enough Democrats are running for president, and looks like we have another guy running, Steve Bullock. Who is just people, Matt, have been clamoring for this guy to jump into the race, correct?
Yeah, Democratic governor of Montana. Not really sure what he sees in this field of 21 candidates that makes him think he can find his own path to the nomination or to becoming a national figure. I do think the only thing to mention for Bullock, I guess two things. One, the Democrats would really much rather have him run for the United States Senate, and he has, decided not to do that. He's not the potentially first-tier Senate candidate that chose to run for president instead of run for Senate. The Democrats have seen similar things happen in states like Georgia and Colorado and Texas, as well as Montana now. I guess the only other thing to say about Bullock is, he has found a way to win over rural voters as a Democrat in a state that Trump won by more than 20%. And so I think that's going to be a big part of his pitch is that he's a, electable candidate that can win back Trump voters. It's hard to see how he gets any traction, and I imagine he won't even hit the 65,000 donor or 1% polling threshold to get in the June debates. So his candidacy may not last very long.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I wanted to ask you next. When do you think we'll start seeing some of the thinning of the herd? Because there are a lot of Democrats, and we may have more. Bill de Blasio may announce that he's going to run for president. So there may be more people who jump into this thing. Realistically, maybe 4 or 5 have a chance at winning. Do you think this starts to thin out after June?
Well, I think it's first question is going to be, do any of these folks not qualify for the televised debates? It's going to be really hard, I think, to get any traction if you're not in the televised debates, which begin, I think, in late June, with the first one being on MSNBC. So I think over the next few months, if you're not in the televised debates, you're going to really be irrelevant. That said, it's hard for me to see what the disincentive is for some of these folks now that they're in to not stay into Iowa. Now, if you're nowhere near the 15% polling threshold, the delegate threshold in Iowa, then you're not going to get any delegates. And so I do think the field may narrow, by 4 or 5 candidates late this year in the winter, or perhaps early next year in January. And then I think the field's going to narrow considerably after Iowa. If you don't really have a path in the first couple states, you're not going to raise money, you're not going to get any attention, you're not going to, get any new support, you're going to have no path. So I think that's where you start accumulating debt, and it just, decision gets made quickly for you. But I think the field will narrow a bit before Iowa and quickly after Iowa. But I also think we're going to have a pretty good divided field for some time. I mean, the Democrats allocate delegates proportionally, so no one is going to have an overwhelming lead. Even if they win a couple of the early states, they're not going to have an overwhelming lead for some time. This thing's going to go beyond Super Tuesday, and it might even go, all the way to the convention. We'll have to see.
Do you think Democrats want that? Do you think they want it to go to the convention?
No, I don't. No, I don't know. I don't even really know how to answer that because I don't know that they care much one way or the other. I think they would probably rather have Democratic primary voters, make the decision rather than delegates. Once you get to on the first ballot, there are no super delegates this time, which is a reform the DNC put in place due to the frustrations of Bernie Sanders' campaign and his supporters last time. But on the second ballot, super delegates come back. So, if it goes beyond one ballot, we're going to have, elites of the Democratic Party, putting their thumb on the scale. So
and Matt, the reason I ask you that is because the elites, the establishment within the Democrat Party, I still wonder if they want to stop Bernie Sanders.
I think they do. There's no question about that. In fact, there was an interesting NBC News story just a couple of days ago about how Bernie and Biden kind of need each other. The longer they're both above 15%, the longer they're going to be able to keep all the other candidates, away from getting traction and becoming, real threats to become the nominee. Biden thinks he can beat Bernie. Bernie thinks he can beat Biden. Ultimately, I think it is probably somewhat likely that they're the final two candidates, although I still think Kamala Harris may be a factor before it's all said and done. So I just, it's hard for me to see what the advantage is for the Democrats if their primary go on and on and on. I mean, it's going to prevent their nominee from raising general election funds as aggressively and unifying the party. It'll give Trump a considerable head start. I think he's already raised $100 million at this point. He's well ahead of where Obama was. So, yeah, I think if this thing continues to drag out, I think that's to the Republicans' advantage.
Yeah, I'm visiting with Matt Mackowiak. Let me ask you about one more Democrat that's out there, Beto O'Rourke. He when he jumped in, he popped. He was able to raise a lot of money, and he's fizzled since. And there are reports, and I guess he basically has. He's saying he's not restarting his campaign. He's reintroducing himself, which is never good in a presidential race. What's going on with his campaign? Is this thing just about over for him?
Yeah, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. I think Beto was wholly unprepared to run for president, and I think to some extent that's probably why it took him several months to get to that point. I think he was grappling with whether he thought he could really be president of the United States, but more so whether he thought he was ready to run. This is a very different race than his Senate race. He thought because Democrats around the country and to some extent in Texas were very aggressively and emotionally invested in his campaign. He thought that he could just take that support and run for president. That's just not how things work. He hasn't been substantive enough. He's been kind of wishy-washy on issues and all over the place. He's run on sort of charisma and biography, much of the last couple of years, and that's not going to be enough in a field where you already have candidates who have charisma and biology, but they're running on actual issues and a platform. He started to try to fix that. He put a pretty aggressive climate change policy together. You're going to see additional policy rollouts. But yeah, his poll numbers have dropped pretty quickly. Again, I don't know that it's decisive at this point, but it's really going in the wrong direction. And a lot of the support that he was getting early on has moved to Mayor Pete, the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, who's really been the beneficiary of Beto's drop. So I don't know that I see him necessarily getting out. There again, as we said before, there's really not much incentive to get out at this point. But he does need to turn things around, pretty quickly here if he's going to maintain his first-tier status. Yeah,
visiting with Matt Mackowiak. Matt, let's shift it over to one of the big stories really dominating. That is the tariff story from the White House. There are stories from, I think, New York Times, Washington Post, and other places that farmers are starting to turn on President Trump, that they're starting to get upset with Trump on this issue of tariffs. I'm not hearing from anyone. We've got a lot of ag producers who listen to this station, and I've yet to hear from any of them who have said, well, we're turning on him, and we're sick, we're getting mad at Trump. We're ready to go to Buttigieg now. When I look at this, and we are probably in the agreement, or, Matt, that this could blow up. This could be bad. A trade war could be bad for the economy. But right now, has Trump earned a little bit of trust among Trump supporters? Hey, go with me on this. There've been doom and gloom predictions in the past, and those haven't come true yet.
Well, look, they've already done one ag bailout, which wasn't as broad as it probably needed to be. It sounds like they're going to do another $15 billion here in the next, month or two. That's obviously a recognition that there is some real damage out there. And the ag sector is where the pain is, most acutely felt. That said, I think the ag industry and other industries, really do believe that China has unfair trade practices and that it's time to rebalance that relationship. The challenge for Trump is, these tariffs can't continue indefinitely. He's got to get a better deal. If he doesn't get a better deal and we had this short-term economic pain, that will be the worst of both worlds. And so we don't know when that'll happen. It could be, next month when he and President Xi of China meet at the G8 in Japan. It could be that they want to wait and see what happens in 2020 on the belief that they can get the tariffs taken off if Biden or some Democrat gets elected. So we really don't know right now what the timeline's going to be. I don't think the tariffs and the pain on the ag industry can continue indefinitely. I don't think they can continue even to 2020 election. It's going to affect states, U.S. Senate races in ag states like, certainly like Iowa and others. So, I think some of this reporting is probably a little overdone. They're trying to put pressure on Trump and try to get him to step back. He can't step back now. Now, this is the problem. He's been sort of doubling down every time, continuing to try to ratchet up pressure on China. I understand why he's trying to do it. He's trying to force them to the table, force them to make the kinds of changes to their approach in terms of forced technology transfer and intellectual property theft, currency manipulation, the kind of things that really do need to change to make it a more fair trade relationship. But you're talking about China basically changing their entire approach to their economy and to trade, and that is not something that's going to happen quickly. So I know we all want to see this get resolved soon. I don't think it will.
Yeah. Matt, before I let you go, I had a texter who wanted your opinion on this. Do you think there's any chance that Beto would bail out of the presidential race and return to Texas to challenge Cornyn?
I don't. I think he'll get some pressure to do that. It's hard for me to see him, if the presidential doesn't work, getting fired up about running for Senate again. And he doesn't really want to run against John Cornyn. He liked running against Cruz. He liked that contrast. I don't think he likes the contrast with Cornyn. And Cornyn's in a much stronger position, has $7 million in the bank, is running a good campaign, campaigning aggressively already, taking it very seriously. So I think the odds of that are low, but until the filing deadline closes in December, you can't say no for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, tell people how they can sign up for your newsletter and also your latest interview for your podcast.
Yeah, so as your listeners probably know, we do a weekday, every weekday morning newsletter on Texas politics. We've got 3,000 subscribers. It's called Must Read Texas. We take all the news and put it into one clean, easy-to-read email every weekday morning. You can sign up for a free one-week trial at mustreadtexas.com. And yes, the podcast is called Mac on Politics. Most recent episode is with United States Senator Tom Cotton, Republican of Arkansas. The podcast is available on the iTunes Store, in Spotify, Google Play, Stitcher, and at the website maconpoliticspodcast.com. Great conversation.
Matt, thank you very much. Appreciate it as always.
Thanks, Chad. Take care.
Have a good one. That's Matt Mackowiak.